chapter 5 in your textbook. Always a fun topic. So let's go ahead and get started. Alcohol. Majority of the people worldwide drink alcoholic beverages. This doesn't include Islamic countries where it is not allowed by Quranic law. Also, most Mormons don't drink alcohol, so there you go. China's alcohol consumption has doubled over the last couple of years. India's alcohol consumption has increased by 50%. 23% of English boys and 27% of English girls, 15 to 16, were drunk 3 times or more in the past month. 16 is a legal drinking age in England. Russian men consume the equivalent of 6 to 7 bottles of vodka per capita per year. 75,000 alcoholics are homeless in Japan, out of a total of 100,000 homeless in the whole country. Around the world, more than 2 million people died due to alcohol. Approximately 10% of all diseases and injuries around the world were a direct result of alcohol abuse. Last month, at least 126 million Americans, that's 52% of all Americans 12 and older, had at least 1 beer, 1 glass of wine, or 1 cocktail. 16 million of this group are considered heavy drinkers, and I think I would consider her a heavy drinker since she's drinking 2 bottles of beer at the same time. More than 2/3 of 11 million American college students at 4-year colleges had 1 drink, or more than 2/3 of those drinkers had 5 or more drinks on at least 1 occasion in the past year. That includes beer bonging, that's what this is, a beer bong. About 6.2% of 8th grade students, 18.5% of 10th grade students, and 30% of 12th grade students have been drunk in the United States. Yesterday, about $250 million was spent at bars, restaurants, and liquor stores for alcoholic beverages in the United States. Yesterday, 7,500 brides and grooms were toasted with champagne in the United States. 25 to 30% of all hospital admissions in the United States were due to direct or indirect medical complications from alcohol. And this is one of the reasons why why I get a little distressed about alcohol. People just laugh it off, but the reality is, if you work in medicine, then you're dealing with this on a continual basis. 90% of all your emergency room visits have to do with alcohol. A lot of the beds are being taken up by people just because they're drinkers. It's really irritating. I learned about this from my mother. She was an emergency room nurse part of her career, and all she did was complain about the drunks coming in. She was not a very tall person. She was about 4'8", 4'9". So she had to use her voice to get these people to listen to her, to hear her. Because, when you're drunk, your ears don't work very well. Anyway, I heard the stories, got to hear the stories, lucky me. And I can tell you that what she was experiencing in the 40s and 50s and 60s, I was experiencing in the 70s and 80s. About half of the murder victims and half of the murderers in the United States were drinking alcohol at the time of the crime. More than half of the rapes that occurred in the United States involved alcohol. About half of American adults have a close family member who has had alcoholism. About half of American adults. In the United States, 2,700,000 crime victims reported that the offender had been drinking alcohol prior to committing the crime. Every year, alcohol abuse and addiction cost businesses, the judicial system, and medical facilities in the United States more than $184 billion, or more than $638 for every man, woman, and child, just so people can have what they call a good time. Alcohol may be as old as civilized men. Evidence of fermented beverages have been found in China that are at least 9,000 years old. A beer recipe was found in ancient Mesopotamia that dates back 7,400 years. Alcohol has been used as a reward for pyramid builders, for food as grain-enriched beer for the same pyramid builders, as a cure-all, laudanum, alcohol mixed with opium, as a sacrament in both the Jewish and Christian religions, as a water substitute with a contaminated water supply in Europe, of course, social lubricant whenever and wherever it is used, as a tranquilizer for whoever uses it, and as a source of taxes. It is especially heavily taxed in the United States, but it's taxed even a lot more in Europe. Throughout history, alcohol has been banned for its negative effects on its users. 2,650 years ago, alcohol was banned in China. 2,500 years ago, alcohol was banned by select Buddhist sects. The ban continues to this day. The Jinn Epidemic found 20 million gallons of gin being manufactured per year. The death toll was enormous. It was controlled by heavy taxing in 1751, which reduced consumption. Prohibition in the United States with the 18th Amendment was ratified by 46 out of 48 states. By 1920, Iowa was the 32nd state to ratify the amendment. Arizona was the 12th state to ratify the amendment. And New Mexico was the 41st state to ratify the amendment. And of course, this was in 1920. It was repealed, of course, by the 21st Amendment in 1933. And the reason why it was repealed, they needed the revenue from the taxes. And of course, that was during the Depression. 1920 was before the Depression. That's why they call the 1920s the Roaring 20s, because there was a lot of people who were drinking and having a great time. And then in 1929, the Depression started, and it was repealed in 1933. But from 1920 until 1933, for 13 years, we had prohibition in the United States. Alcohol prohibition or even control is often run into a stone wall. Attempts in sub-Saharan Africa to control beer consumption has been impossible because of the fairly nutritious homebrewed beer that provides a modicum of grain. The pilgrims loved their grog. This idea followed through to the Revolution, as alcohol sales and taxation provided needed revenue to finance the war. Of course, we think of the pilgrims as these hyper-religious individuals. The reality was they were drinkers. They consumed a lot of alcohol. Temperance began in the United States in the 1840s, but wasn't successful until 80 years later, in 1920. Alcohol continues to provide revenue for governments in the United States. The federal government taxes alcohol manufacturers $13.50 on each 180 proof gallon. How many bottles of whiskey are there in a gallon of whiskey? There are 5. That's why they call it a fifth. It's a fifth of a gallon. The states average a little less than half that much at $6.50. Beer and wine are taxed differently. About a nickel a drink goes to the federal government per beer. Wine is taxed by alcoholic content. 14% or less is taxed at 21 cents per fifth. 14 to 21% is taxed at 31% per fifth. 21 to 24% is taxed at 62 cents per fifth. Naturally, sparkling wine is taxed at 67 cents per fifth. Artificially carbonated wine is taxed at 65 cents per fifth. Now, why in the world would you do this with sparkling wine and carbonated wine? Because it gets people drunk faster. There are hundreds of different alcohols, ranging from deadly poisonous to barely toxic. The alcohol that people drink is ethyl alcohol, grain alcohol, ethanol, or ETOH. We used to call it in the lab, we called it ETOH, which stands for ethanol. The next most common alcohol is methyl alcohol, wood alcohol, or methanol. Isopropyl alcohol, or isopropanol, is a solvent used in medicine. Butyl alcohol, or butanol, is used in industrial processes. So we have all of these alcohols. This is the only one you can really drink. Don't try drinking any of the others. They will poison you. Any beverage with over 2% alcohol is called an alcoholic beverage. All alcoholic beverages contain ethanol, but may acquire the other alcohols in the production process. Additions due to production are called congeners, which add distinctive tastes, aromas, and colors to the beverage. Congeners may be acids, they may be aldehydes, esters, ketones, phenols, or tannins. Some beverages add a number of congeners. Whiskey and brandy have the most, while beer and vodka have the least. The more congener in the beverage, the more severe the hangover. Methyl alcohol is fairly toxic and has a curious affinity for the optic nerve. During Prohibition in the United States, some bootleg manufacturers mistakenly added methanol to their beverages to increase the alcoholic content. The result was often blindness or, in extreme cases, death. Alcohol comes in three categories: beer, wine, and distilled spirits. Beer would include any grain fermentation. Usually it's barley and wheat that they use. Wine is produced when fruit ferments, usually grapes, plums, or peaches. And distilled spirits are made from fermented grains, tubers, fruits, vegetables, or other plants. Fermented grains. Whiskey's made from fermented grain. Usually corn whiskey is a type of whiskey. It's about 40 to 50% alcohol. Tubers, vodka is made from potatoes, about 75% alcohol. Distilled spirits that are made from fruit would be schnapps and palinka. It's about 40 to 50% alcohol, just like whiskey is. Vegetables or any other plant. Absinthe is made from, what is it? Absinthe is made from wood, a different type of wood. Tequila and mezcal are made from the agave plant, and rum is made from sugar. And the ones made from vegetables are 40 to 75% alcohol. Okay, and there are the three types. This is beer, this is wine, and these are distilled spirits. Containing a 12-ounce beer contains the same amount of alcohol as 1.5 ounces of distilled spirits, or 5 ounces of wine. The first indication of beer consumption comes from 10,000 years ago. Beer is made from grains, usually barley, but sometimes wheat, which have been allowed to sprout and then crushed and fermented with hops and yeast. Who came up with this? Let's let it sprout and then we'll crush it and then ferment it and then we'll mix it with hops and yeast. Who does that? About 5 to 6% of all beers are ales. A stout is another type of beer. A Guinness is a stout. Porter, we don't drink porter in the United States. It's a very common drink in England. Malt liquors, Colt 45 is a malt liquor. Mickey's Old English 800. About 6 to 9% of all beers are malt liquors. Lager is very popular. Oh, that's the amount of alcohol. I'm sorry. So ale is 5 to 6% alcohol. Malt liquors are 6 to 9% alcohol. Lagers such as Coors, Budweiser, or Miller are 3.2 to 5% alcohol. And then there are Bock beers as well. Bock beers are real popular on the East Coast. Cutapole, Shanling, Michelob, Amber, Bock. These are all East Coast beers. They're a little bit more bitter taste. I guess lager is not as bitter. German beer is usually a Bock beer. Wine is a fermented beverage from a fruit or grain. Most people think of wine as coming from grapes, but it can also be processed from rice, peaches, or plums. When it's processed from rice, it's called, sake. American wines tend to be stronger than European wines. American wines have between 12 to 14% alcohol. European wines contain 8 to 12% alcohol. Now, there's a reason for this. The reason is because in England or in Europe, they couldn't drink the water. The water was contaminated. It's been contaminated for eons. It's been contaminated ever since the rivers started flowing. People were using them as toilets. So they produced wine that wasn't nearly as strong. And that was okay because, they weren't really trying to get drunk. They were using wine as the only beverage that they could drink. In the United States, of course, we decided that we were going to make wines too. And so we made the wines for people to drink and get drunk or to feel a little tipsy. So we were using our wine as for a different purpose than the Europeans were, and that's the reason European wine is weaker than American wine. Fortified wines have alcohol added and have between 17 and 21% alcohol. Wine coolers contain juice and have around 6% alcohol. Distilled spirits are alcoholic beverages that go through a distillation process, concentrating the substance into ethyl alcohol. These spirits are almost always stronger than beer or wine. When this process was developed in Europe, the number of alcoholics in the continent exploded. When the immigrants came to the United States, they found it cheaper to transport their sugar as rum and their corn as whiskey. Alcoholism has been very high in the United States since colonial days. Europeans tend to drink much more alcohol than people in the United States. Americans drink 95 liters of beer per capita and 20 liters of wine. Germans drink 131 liters of beer per capita and 22 liters of wine. Brits drink 103 liters of beer per capita and 13 liters of wine. The French drink 40 liters of beer per capita, but 60 liters of wine. Italians drink 103 liters of beer per capita and 59 liters of wine. I think they're number one. Yeah, they are the number one drinkers in the world. Alcohol is absorbed all along the gastrointestinal tract. It's absorbed in the stomach, in the small intestines, and in the colon. Let me tell you a quick story. One of my jobs in the service was collecting drug urines from people. We had a kid that came in and he'd been drinking, and he was pretty snockered. He was in pretty bad shape, and he had to collect drug urine for us to make sure he wasn't not only drinking alcohol, but we wanted to find out if he'd been shooting up with heroin or snorting cocaine or whatever. So we had to collect a drug urine on him. So we sent him into the bathroom. His bladder wouldn't work. So he came out, and they suggested giving him water. Now I wasn't even thinking. I was working on something else. This was late at night. I was working graveyard shift. I was the only lab tech in the laboratory. So I wasn't thinking. They decided to give him water. They gave him a big glass of water. Went in to collect another urine specimen, collapsed. He passed out. And the reason he passed out was because they gave him water, and the water brought the alcohol out of his stomach. And that made him even drunker than he was before. We got a real serious problem here. He gets so much alcohol, he passes out. We had to take him upstairs to the emergency room. Labs are very often in the basement where we can, that's where the morgue is. So it was really kind of an interesting situation. In men, 10 to 20% of alcohol is absorbed, but we did get his urine. So there you go. In men, 10 to 20% of alcohol is absorbed by the stomach, whereas women absorb no alcohol in their stomachs. Most of men's alcohol and almost all of women's alcohol is absorbed through capillaries in the wall of the small intestine. Because of the different processing of alcohol for males and females, a woman who consumes the same amount of alcohol and weighs the same as a man will still maintain 30% more alcohol in her bloodstream. So don't ever match shots, even if the guy's the same size as you are. Women have a greater problem than men because women have a lower percentage of body water to dilute the alcohol. Women have less alcohol dehydrogenase in their stomachs to break down the alcohol. Women's hormonal fluctuations can make them more or less susceptible to alcohol's effects. Women absorb more alcohol during their premenstrual period than at any other time during their cycle. Alcohol does greater damage to women than it does to men. Female alcoholics have death rates 50 to 100% higher than male alcoholics. The alcohol that is absorbed in the bloodstream is partially metabolized by the liver. The alcohol that is not metabolized by the liver moves easily through the capillary walls and can enter any organ or tissue because the molecules are small. It is water soluble, but it's also lipid soluble. Alcohol will readily cross the placental barrier and pass into the fetus's bloodstream. And this is why we have to worry about fetal alcohol syndrome, because alcohol crosses into the baby's body very readily. After imbibing, the individual will have a highest concentration of alcohol 60 to 90 minutes after the last drink. Rate of absorption determines the degree of effects, which can be influenced by the individual's body weight, their body fat, their body chemistry, the emotional state that they're in, the health status, and the temperature and barometric pressure. Absorption and drunkenness can be increased by increasing the volume of the rate of drinking, drinking on an empty stomach, using high alcohol percentage drinks, drinking carbonated beverages such as champagne, tonic water, or pop with your alcoholic beverage, or warming the alcohol. You can slow absorption or lessen the effect of alcohol by eating before or while drinking. Eat something fat so that it will absorb into the fat. You can eat meats or milk or cheese. Any fatty foods will work. Diluting the drink with ice water or juice. 2 to 10% of the alcohol will be excreted before metabolism occurs. The remaining 90 to 98% of the alcohol is metabolized through oxidation by the liver and excreted through the kidneys and the lungs, and you can smell it. You can smell it on somebody's breath. You can smell it in their urine. In order of oxidation, alcohol is broken down by alcohol dehydrogenase, creating acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde dehydrogenase breaks down the acetaldehyde into acetic acid. Oxygen breaks down the acetic acid into carbon dioxide and water. Acetaldehyde is a substance that resembles formaldehyde and is very toxic to the liver. And this is one of the reasons why people who drink excessively will destroy their livers, because they're literally pickling their liver. It has been speculated that American Indians may have a high alcoholism rate and advanced cirrhosis because of disruptions of the acetaldehyde dehydrogenase and alcohol dehydrogenase systems. This, along with the binge pattern of drinking, increases the likelihood of an unfortunate outcome for drinking with American Indians. Individuals may use home remedies to keep from getting drunk. Aspirin inhibits metabolism of alcohol, and when used as a prophylactic to lessen the possibility of a hangover, it actually causes the individual to become drunk faster. I used to have a girlfriend that did this. She would take aspirin as a prophylactic. When she was going out and drinking, she would, not with me, of course. I had kids. I had to take care of my kids. But when she went out to drink, she would take aspirin before she left, and then she'd take it after she came back, hoping that, of course, it would lessen the effect of her hangover. What it actually did was aspirin dilutes your blood, and that's what happened to her. This was during Vietnam, and she wanted to donate blood because her brother was in Vietnam at the time. And she wanted to donate blood to the Red Cross, but she couldn't do it because her blood was too thin because of all the aspirin that she took, trying to keep from getting a hangover. So and her periods were just like 2 weeks long. I mean, it was horrible. The reality, she told me, the reality is that blood is metabolized by the body at a fairly steady rate, about 1 ounce, 1.5 drinks every 3 hours. So it takes you 3 hours to get rid of 1.5 beers. It takes about 20 minutes before the alcohol is passed into the intestines and has started to affect the brain. In most states, a blood alcohol level of 0.08 is considered legal intoxication, except for Utah. I guess Utah it's 0.45. 0.045. For truck drivers, it is half that level, and pilots, it is 1/4. England's legal limit is 0.04. Norway's legal limit is 0.10. The rest of Europe is 0.025. Australia's legal limit is 0.05. So we have more liberal laws than Australia, Europe, and England. But what we don't have in the United States is good public transportation, which they do have in all of those countries. Small amounts of ethanol or even infrequent bouts of intoxication have little, if any, negative effects on an individual. No level of alcohol use is safe for someone who is pregnant. Remember, the alcohol crosses the placental barrier very readily. So anything that she consumes, the baby consumes. Some people, I just got a bite of lemon. Some people are allergic to alcohol and its congeners. Some have high genetic or environmental susceptibility to addiction. Some have a history of abuse and addiction. Alcohol increases the probability of breast cancer. I had a student when I was teaching at Ashford who was not sensitive to alcohol, so she could drink everybody under the table. And she would do this to win bar bets. And I told her, of course, yeah, maybe it doesn't affect your brain, but it's affecting your body, and you need to stop doing that kind of silly stuff. I don't know if she ever listened to me or not. Therapeutic uses, used as a solvent in medications because it is fat and water soluble. As a topical disinfectant, as a body rub to reduce fever, as a pain reliever for nerve-related pain. It can be used to halt premature labor. In hospitals, we don't use alcohol. We don't give you a slug of whiskey. Normally, if we want to stop your premature labor, we will give you magnesium sulfate. Why do people drink? They think it tastes good, to quench their thirst, to relax muscle tension, to warm themselves up. It dilates blood vessels and increases blood flow to subcutaneous tissue. That's why drunks have red noses. Red wines are full of antioxidants and work as an anti-inflammatory on the circulatory system. 1 to 2 drinks per day reduces the incidence of heart disease and plaque buildup. It has an anti-inflammatory effect. It increases your HDL, which is the good cholesterol. It changes the interaction of the lipoproteins, the HDL and the LDL. The LDL is the bad stuff. It decreases tension. These effects are even true in the most serious alcoholics. These people die from or with enlarged hearts, cirrhotic livers, and damaged brains. Health benefits of alcohol in viable women. Drinking increases the effects of estrogen on bone loss, giving them higher bone mass. 1 to 2 drinks per day lowers the risk of stroke. Heavy drinking actually increases the possibility of a stroke. It can add to relaxation and decrease the time it takes to go to sleep. Alcohol reduces REM sleep and decreases dreaming, making the individual feel less rested the next day. Chronic drinking of alcohol increases the risk of sleep apnea, getting yourself in a position where you can't breathe very well. Not everybody has the same psychological effects with alcohol. It can depend on the environment used, the mood the individual is in prior to drinking, the general psychological makeup of the user. It tends to lower inhibitions, increase self-confidence. It promotes sociability. It calms the individual. It relaxes them. It sedates them. It reduces their tension. For someone lonely, depressed, angry, or suicidal, alcohol acts as a depressant. It deepens negative emotions with disinhibiting effects, makes you verbally aggressive, physically aggressive, and sometimes violent. Even low to moderate doses can impair judgment when driving and result in vehicular crashes. It leads to higher risk sexual activity. I've never been much of a drinker. I'm not very good at it. The reason is because when I drink, I get depressed. It makes me depressed. So there you go. It doesn't make me happy at all. I'm happy most of the time. What it does, it makes me depressed. It makes me depressed. It gives me the flu. I mean, it doesn't really give me the flu. Gives me a hangover, which feels like the flu. So why in the world would I do it? I vomit, and I get depressed, and well, it doesn't make any sense. Neurotransmitters affected by alcohol. Alcohol initially causes a release of serotonin, raising mood. Excess use depletes serotonin, causing depression, of course. Dopamine is released, giving a surge of pleasure, the D1, D2, and D3 sites in the mesolimbic reward pathway. Alcohol causes a release of norepinephrine, resulting in positive mood and raised self-esteem. Metencaphalin is released, reducing pain. Glutamate release is pleasurable, reinforcing drinking. Endorphins and anandamides are released, reinforcing the drinking. NMDA receptors are inhibited, impairing memory. GABA is released, lowering inhibitions and slowing the brain. So your inhibitions are reduced. You can't remember what you did. The pain is all going away. And you got all these pleasurable things that happen. Alcohol and sex. At low doses, alcohol increases desire in both males and females. It can intensify orgasms in females. It decreases erectile function and delays ejaculation in males. Alcohol has long been mythologized as a sexual lubricant, though its effects should not always lead to this reality. Unfortunately, among adolescents, 39% of males and 18% of females believe that a drunk female is fair game to have sex forced on her. If she's drunk, 39% of males think it's okay to have sex with her. 18% of females feel the same way, about 20%. About 1 out of every 5. High blood alcohol levels can cause intoxication, but experienced drinkers can mask the effects of alcohol for a brief period. Binge drinking is consuming 5 or more drinks in one sitting for males and 4 or more drinks in one sitting for a female. 44% of college students admit to being binge drinkers. 21% of college students admit to binging frequently. Binge drinkers believe between 21 and 25 average 18 binges a year. Binge drinkers between 18 and 20 average 15 binges a year. For many people who drink frequently, 5 drinks will not get them drunk. Heavy drinking is consuming 5 or more drinks at a sitting at least 5 times a month. With heavy consumption, the drinker can no longer control their mood from the alcohol. The depressant effect takes over. Blood pressure is lowered. Motor reflexes will slow. Digestion and nutrient absorption becomes inefficient. Body heat escapes rapidly because of chronically dilated blood vessels. Sexual performance becomes unlikely. Speech slurs. Muscle coordination becomes questionable. Alertness decreases. High doses of alcohol, a blood alcohol level of 0.12, may cause mental confusion, mood swings, loss of judgment, emotional turbulence, slurred speech, loss of emotional control, disturbed REM sleep and dreaming, fatigue during the day, insomnia at night, bedwetting, apnea in the form of snoring. Alcohol consumption at high doses rapidly can lead to alcohol poisoning at a blood alcohol test level of 0.40. This will cause a depression to the central nervous system. It will make you pass out. You may go into a coma. You may go into respiratory arrest. You may have cardiac failure. And of course, if any of those things happen, well, the respiratory arrest and cardiac failure will cause death. When other depressants are in the system, such as opiates or sedative hypnotics, metabolism is slowed and the possibility of death increases. With novice drinkers with a low tolerance, the deadly effects of alcohol will begin at a lower blood alcohol test level around 0.20. Respiration severely slows. The abuser goes into a semi-conscious state. Vomiting occurs. The abuser may aspirate vomitus, blocking the lungs or leading to introduction of the acidic substance contaminating the lung tissue, which of course may cause pneumonia. About 1/3 of all drinkers and 2/3 of all, and let me tell you, I've seen this over and over again. Kids coming in, somebody made them drink, or they thought they'd be cool and drink, and they had alcohol poisoning. There's nothing we can do. We can try to dilute out their blood, but it doesn't. I mean, it's kind of a crapshoot. The probability, if they come in and they've been drinking a lot of booze, they're not used to it, they have alcohol poisoning, it's tough. It's tough to save those kids' lives. About 1/3 of all drinkers and 2/3 of all drunks experience blackout. During blackouts, a person seems to act normally and is awake, but afterward cannot recall anything that was said or done. Blackouts are caused by an electrochemical disruption in the brain. Even a small amount of alcohol might lead to a blackout. Blackouts are considered an early indication of alcoholism. A partial recall of events is known as a brownout. Researchers have found several explanations for blackouts. The EEGs of individuals who black out show a dampening of the P3 and P300 brainwave. Women who have had suffered a sexual trauma at an early age were more likely to drink and more likely to black out when they did drink. Researchers have found that alcohol greatly disrupts the activity of the CA1 region of the hippocampus. The CA1 region of the hippocampus facilitates the formation of memory. Alcohol also disrupts the NMDA receptor in the hippocampus. This receptor allows for long-term memory to be formed. No one is quite sure why hangovers occur. It has been speculated that the more congeners in the alcohol, the more likely the individual will suffer from a hangover, though even pure alcohol will leave someone with a hangover. Alcohol does irritate the stomach lining, and this might contribute to the intestinal symptoms. Other symptoms and results include low blood sugar, dehydration, and tissue degradation. The bottom line, however, is that the more alcohol consumed, the more severe the hangover. Hangovers are the most severe many hours after the alcohol has been completely eliminated from the system. Nausea, vomiting, headache, thirst, dizziness, mood disturbances, abbreviated sleep, sensitivity to light, sensitivity to noise, dry mouth, inability to concentrate, a general depressed feeling. Chronic high-dose users are the most likely to suffer from hangovers. The best way to control the side effects of alcohol is to control the amount of alcohol consumed. Duh. The elimination of alcohol from the system is a constant 0.25 to 0.33 ounces of alcohol eliminated per hour. Hangovers are caused by an imbalance of hormones, enzymes, body fluids, and body systems. Until these come back into equilibrium, the symptoms will persist. Body fluids and sugar levels can be replaced with fruit juices. Analgesics can reduce the headache pain. Nothing works on hormones. Nothing works on body systems. Nothing works on enzymes. Recovery can only come with time and rest. Tylenol should be avoided because it can do additional liver damage when alcohol is present in the system. So you need to use ibuprofen, Advil. Advil's acetaminophen, I think. Anyway, don't use Tylenol. Chronic alcohol usage does more damage to the entire neurochemistry and cellular system of the body than any other psychoactive substance. This is what cirrhosis looks like. This is what a normal liver looks like. This is what a cirrhotic liver looks like. Cute, isn't it? This is about 4 times the size of this. I was working for a doctor in Oklahoma, and this guy came in who was a chronic alcoholic, and they had him laying down on the gurney, And the doctor said, come here, come here, come here. I want you to feel this. And so he said, palpate his liver. And so, your liver's right underneath your rib cage. So here I am, I'm palpating, and it's just hard as a brick. And I'm going down, trying to find the end of his liver, and going down and going down. It was laying on the top of his pelvis. That's how big his liver was. It was huge. Alcohol especially affects the digestive system and liver because it is the organs of these systems that deal with the alcohol in its purest form. It is these systems that are tasked by the body to rid the entity of this toxin. 80% of the alcohol is metabolized by the liver. High doses and chronic usage damages the liver and compromises its function, causing fatty liver, hepatitis, which is just an infection of the liver, and of course cirrhosis, which is death of the tissue. Accumulation of fatty acids in the liver can occur after only a few days of heavy drinking. While abstinence will reduce the accumulated fat, constant abuse can lead to fatty livers. And that's what happened with this guy. That's why his liver was so enlarged. About 20% of alcoholics and heavy drinkers will develop fatty livers. Fatty liver is just one possible outcome. 10 to 35% of heavy drinkers develop alcoholic hepatitis. Hepatitis is an inflammation of the liver which can result in formation of scar tissue. This is known as fibrosis, cell death, necrosis, or damage to membranes. This condition is characterized by jaundice, which means that your serum turns yellow. Normally almost clear, but jaundice means that it turns bright yellow. Liver enlargement, tenderness, and pain. Abstinence is the only cure, but the liver damage is permanent. Nothing you can do about it. When heavy drinking leads to excessive fibrosis and necrosis, the condition is referred to as cirrhosis. Cirrhosis is the leading cause of death among alcoholics. 12,000 Americans die every year from cirrhosis. The cirrhosis is not only caused by the alcohol, but the metabolites of the alcohol that are actually more toxic than the alcohol, the free radicals and the acetaldehyde. Remember, acetaldehyde is the same thing as formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is what we say we preserve tissue in. So acetaldehyde is very similar to that. It usually takes 10 years of steady drinking to achieve cirrhosis. 80% of all cirrhosis in the United States is caused by alcohol. 2.5 times more men die of cirrhosis than women. Hispanics seem to be the most sensitive to cirrhotic effects of alcohol, followed by African Americans and then Caucasians. Rates of cirrhosis in the United States have waxed and waned along with the popularity of alcohol in the culture. Before Prohibition, 17 out of every 100,000 people suffered from cirrhosis. In 1932, at the end of Prohibition, the level had dropped more than half to 8 per 100,000. By 1973, the disco era, the level was 14.9 per 100,000. In 2004, the level had dropped to 9 per 100,000. In 2017, the level had dropped to 5.9 per 100,000. New Mexico has the highest rate of cirrhosis in the United States of any state. Congratulations to you, New Mexico. Other countries, especially European countries, have rates of cirrhosis that eclipse that in the United States. Remember, what were we at? Oh, wait a minute. 5.9 in 2017. So Kazakhstan, 23.9 per 100,000. Germany, 15.4 per 100,000. Italy, 13.9 per 100,000. Spain, 12.2 per 100,000. France, 12.1 per 100,000. Japan, 7.2 per 100,000. United Kingdom, 6.4 per 100,000. Australia, 4.6 per 100,000. Israel, 4.9 per 100,000. And Greece, 3.4 per 100,000. Low doses of alcohol actually aid in digestion. Moderate to excessive doses induce overproduction of stomach acids, which causes the delay of the emptying of the stomach. Excessive use can cause gastritis, which is inflammation of the stomach, inflammation in the esophagus, inflammation of the small intestines, inflammation of the pancreas, known as pancreatitis. This is caused by blocked ducts or overproduction of digestive enzymes, ulcers, stomach hemorrhaging, gastrointestinal bleeding, and cancer. I'm not going to tell you. I have a couple stories, one about pancreatitis and the other about stomach hemorrhages, but I think I'll skip them this time. Strangely, you can live on alcohol as each drink carries about 150 calories, but it tends to be poor nutritionally as there are few vitamins, minerals, or proteins. Heavy drinkers may receive half their calories, little nutrition from their drinking. B1 deficiencies can lead to beriberi, heart disease, peripheral nerve degeneration, pellagra, scurvy, and anemia. With heavy usage, intestinal complications may occur, which can result in secondary malnutrition, where nutrition absorption is impaired. Alcohol is so toxic that the liver must work overtime to rid the body of its effects. Unfortunately, the other important function of the liver is to store glucose for emergencies in the form of glycogen. With the stress of metabolizing alcohol, the liver is too busy to produce and store glycogen. Because of this, alcoholics may suffer from hypoglycemia, which especially if they are drinking their sustenance. In other words, they're not doing anything but drinking, not eating any other foods. If the individual is taking insufficient nutrition, the extra carbohydrates in the alcohol can cause hyperglycemia. In other words, it can give you diabetes. Light to moderate drinking of alcohol actually can help the heart. Chronic heavy drinking can lead to heart disease by a factor of 6 times, hypertension by a factor of 2 to 3 times, cardiac arrhythmia, cardiomyopathy, which is an enlarged, flabby, and inefficient heart. Alcohol damages the striated muscles of the heart. The hearts of heavy drinkers is often twice the size of a normal heart. 80% of heavy drinkers have heart muscle abnormalities, though only 2% suffer from full-blown alcoholic heart muscle disease. Stroke and other intracranial bleeding, usually within 24 hours of heavy drinking. Country and Western star Hank Williams drank himself to death at age 29. Congratulations, Hank Williams. Yankee baseball star Mickey Mantle drank himself to death at 64 after getting a liver transplant. Singer Billie Holiday was 44 when she died of alcoholism. F. Scott Fitzgerald, the author of The Great Gatsby, drank himself to death at 44. Zelda, his wife, the first flapper of the 1920s, drank herself into a sanatorium at 30 and spent the last 18 years of her life in and out of institutions. Richard Burton was a famous actor and twice the husband of Elizabeth Taylor. He died at 59 from a lifetime of heavy drinking. Errol Flynn was a famous actor of the late 30s and 40s. He died of alcoholism at age 50. Truman Capote was the author of In Cold Blood and the subject of the movie Breakfast at Tiffany's. He died of alcoholism at age 60. Jack Kerouac was an author from the 1950s and one of the original beat writers. He wrote the 50s classic On the Road. He died of alcoholism at age 47. English singer Amy Winehouse died of alcohol poisoning at age 27 in 2011. Country singer Keith Whiteley died of a heart attack induced by an adult life of heavy drinking at age 34. Vern Troyer of Mini-Me fame from the Austin Powers movies committed suicide by ingesting copious amounts of vodka and tequila at age 49. Jeff Hanneman of the thrash metal band Slayer died after a life of heavy alcohol consumption at age 49. Alcohol kills brain cells by limiting the brain's ability to use glucose and oxygen, though moderate doses don't seem to cause permanent damage. Heavy doses cause direct damage to nerve cells. Malnutrition caused by alcohol will not only damage brain cells, but brain chemistry as well. Brain atrophy has been documented in up to 100% of alcoholic autopsies. Dementia is a result of prolonged heavy drinking as well. I can remember my first autopsy was this guy, and he always made us take the brains out. The doctor I was working with, and wow, it was like half the size of his skull. It was really kind of amazing. And he was an alcoholic, and of course you could smell it. You could smell it everywhere. It was all throughout his body. You could smell alcohol. It smelled like they had pickled him or something. Heavy drinking can lead to two serious brain maladies: Wernicke's encephalopathy, which causes delirium, imbalance, visual problems, ataxia, the inability to coordinate your movements in the lower extremities. And the other is Korsakoff's psychosis. It's a disorientation, a memory failure, and a confabulation, a repetition of false memories. Epilepsy is also related to heavy alcohol intake. Epilepsy is 10 times more prevalent among alcoholics. The reproductive system and sexual desire are also affected by alcohol. Whereas light drinking actually lowers inhibitions and increases desire and the intensity of orgasms, heavy drinking decreases desire and lessens the intensity of orgasms. Research with heavy female drinkers found that 36% only had orgasms 5% of the time. Chronic drinking can inhibit ovulation, decrease gonadal mass, delay menstruation, cause sexual dysfunction, promotes infertility, increases the chances of spontaneous abortion. The reproductive system and sexual desire are also affected, whereas low to moderate drinking. Oh, I've already said that once. Didn't I? Whereas low to moderate drinking can lower inhibitions and enhance the psychological aspects of sexual activity, chronic heavy use can lead to inability to perform. Research found that 71% of alcoholics suffered from erectile dysfunction compared to 7% of abstainers. Chronic heavy usage leads to a lower testosterone and an increased estrogen level. Male breast enlargement is caused by chronic heavy alcohol usage, testicular atrophy, low sperm count, loss of body hair, loss of sexual desire. Performance anxiety once sexual activity is resumed is a possibility. The most serious effect may be social drinkers tend to socialize mainly in bars and at parties where normal sexual relationships are circumspect. While the connection between breast cancer and drinking is questionable, the possibility of developing cancers in the areas that come in contact with the alcohol is 6 times greater than those who do not imbibe. Mouth cancer, throat cancer, esophageal cancer. These cancers are 7 times more likely for those who use tobacco but do not drink. For people who drink and smoke both, the possibility of developing these cancers increases by a factor of 38. And of course, liver cancer is a possibility as well. Alcohol leaches minerals from the body, leading to a greater risk of fracture. Myopathy, muscle inflammation, can be caused by chronically imbalanced electrolytes due to alcohol consumption. Dilation of blood vessels near the skin can lead to a chronic reddish complexion, while the toxic effects of alcohol may lead to thinning of the skin, acne rosacea, psoriasis, eczema, and facial edema. Heavy drinking disrupts the immune system by especially white blood cells, making the individual susceptible to infections, respiratory infections, tuberculosis, and pneumonia. Chronic heavy usage of alcohol can make the individual a great deal of fun. They have memory problems, they have hallucinations, they tend to be paranoid, they have severe depression, insomnia, intense anxiety, amnesia, and blackouts due to damage to the frontal lobes and hippocampus. The individual often has problems with concentration and implanting new information in the brain. On the average, heavy drinkers reduce their lifespan by up to 15 years. There are 140 million drinkers in the United States. Of those, 10 to 12% will become alcoholics. 14% of male drinkers and 6% of female drinkers will become alcoholics. Men become alcoholics at a younger age than women do. 20% of all drinkers, heavy drinkers, consume 80% of all the alcohol. 20% of all the drinkers consume 80% of all the alcohol drunk in the United States. Alcohol production and usage have been controlled by financial factors since before the beginning of the United States. And just like slavery, its detractors have been screaming into the wind. Founding father Dr. Benjamin Rush warned of the deleterious effects of alcohol as early as 1804. Dr. Thomas Trotter was coming to the same conclusions at the same time, but their administrations fell on deaf ears. In 1941, Dr. E.M. Jelinek and Carl Bowman developed classifications of the different forms of alcoholism. The comfortable classification of alcoholics has changed over time as the understanding of the addiction process has progressed. According to a recent reclassification by the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism constructed in 2007, there are 5 subtypes of alcoholics based on 6 criteria: family history, age of onset of drinking and problem drinking, patterns of craving and abuse, use of additional drugs, and mental conditions. Subtype 1, young adult, 31.5% of U.S. alcoholics are of this subtype. They are characterized by relatively low rates of simultaneous drug abuse and other mental conditions, low rates of family alcoholism, and they rarely seek any kind of alcoholic treatment. Subtype 2, young antisocial, 21% of U.S. alcoholics are young antisocial alcoholics. They're usually in their mid-20s with precocious onset of regular drinking and alcohol-related issues. Over 50% come from families with alcoholism problems, and about 50% have an antisocial personality disorder and a major depression, bipolar disorder, and anxiety problems. Over 75% smoke cigarettes and marijuana, and a large percent also had cocaine or heroin addictions. More than 30% of them looked for help. These are the young antisocials. Subtype 3 are the functional alcoholics. Functional alcoholics represent 19.5% of U.S. alcoholics. Usually they're middle-aged, well-educated, with stable jobs and families. Approximately 33% present a multi-generational family history of alcoholism. About 25% presented major depressive illness during their lifespan, and about 50% were smokers. Subtype 4, the intermediate familial. 19% of U.S. alcoholics are intermediate familial alcoholics. Middle-aged and coming from multi-generational alcoholism, about 50% have presented clinical depression and 20% bipolar disorder. Most of them smoked cigarettes and about 20% abused cocaine and marijuana. Just 25% will look for a cure. Subtype 5, the chronic severe alcoholic. Let me take a drink of lemonade, of course. 9% of U.S. alcoholics can be categorized as chronic severe. The majority are middle-aged individuals with early onset of drinking and alcohol-related issues, with high rates of antisocial personality disorder and criminality. 80% presented multi-generational alcoholism. They were the most prone to psychiatric conditions and drug abuse. 70% of them looked for help, forming the main category in the alcoholic treatment. The coexistence of psychiatric and drug abuse issues were linked with severity of alcoholism and the date of beginning the treatment. Help seeking was found to be relatively rare, people choosing mainly to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and participate in other 12-step programs. Family studies have shown that there is a hereditary influence on alcoholism. The same genes that potentially lead to addiction also may express a proclivity to become an alcoholic. And of course, this is the DRD2A1 gene. But people who drink may have several other genetic anomalies that might lead to alcoholism. Many Asians have an ALDH2 gene that encodes aldehyde dehydrogenase. Because the person doesn't have as much of the enzyme to rid themselves of toxic alcohol, they become ill when they drink. Half the Japanese and many other Asians have more efficient alcohol dehydrogenase and less efficient aldehyde dehydrogenase, which leads to a buildup of acetaldehyde, which in turn creates a toxic level of acetaldehyde, resulting in flushing of the face, tachycardia, headache, edema, hypertension, and vomiting. Other indicators that heredity strongly influences alcoholism is such characteristics that run in families or groups, such as the tendency to have blackouts, greater initial tolerance to alcohol, an impaired decision-making area of the brain, a major shift in personality during drinking, an impaired ability to learn from mistakes, retrograde amnesia, low level of response to alcohol, cirrhosis, alcoholic psychosis. The environment that an individual inhabits can have a strong influence on whether they drink alcohol. Factors that can lead to alcohol abuse include child abuse, alcohol or other drug-abusing parents, friend or relative, chaotic familial relations, peer pressure, and extreme stress. One of the most powerful environmental factors in alcohol or drug abuse is sexual, physical, or emotional abuse at a young age. In one study looking at 275 female and 556 male alcoholics, 20% of the men and 50% of the women said that they had been subject to physical or sexual abuse as a child. When someone drinks alcohol, their brain-body neurochemistry changes. The brain-body will try to protect itself from the effects of alcohol by developing a tolerance to the substance. The drinker will develop metabolic tolerance by metabolizing the alcohol more efficiently. The liver of the drinker will manufacture more enzyme to break down the alcohol and the metabolite acetaldehyde. This also accelerates the breaking down of other drugs, including prescription medications. When someone drinks alcohol, their brain-body neurochemistry changes. Pharmacodynamic tolerance takes place in the brain when brain neurons and other cells become resistant to the effect of alcohol by increasing the number of receptor sites for GABA in the brain, becoming less sensitive to alcohol. Behavioral tolerance occurs when the drinker learns to handle their liquor, changing their behavior to make it more acceptable, and acting in a way to hide their drunkenness. Hangovers represent the individual's withdrawal reactions to the alcohol. 85 to 95% of those experiencing withdrawal will have only minor symptoms: rapid pulse, sweating, increased body temperature, hand tremors, anxiety, depression, insomnia, nausea, or vomiting. 5 to 15% will experience life-threatening major symptoms of withdrawal: tachycardia, transient tactile, auditory, or visual hallucinations and illusions, psychomotor agitation, grand mal seizures, delirium tremens. For individuals going through alcohol withdrawals, delirium tremens and seizures are the most severe and life-threatening effects. Before modern medications to ease the sufferer, 35% of people going through severe symptoms died. With modern techniques, the mortality rate still approaches 5 to 15%, and if left untreated, the rates increase to 10 to 20%. Delirium tremens usually begins 48 to 96 hours after the individual's last drink. The DTs can last from 3 to 5 days, with some serious cases extending into 50 days. Individuals who have gone through the DTs before seem to fear the powerful and frightening hallucinations that they suffer more than any other symptom. Severe symptoms develop after prolonged heavy drinking, 48 to 87 consecutive days of heavy drinking. And this is one of the reasons why people that sell alcohol put monsters in their advertisements. And here's one right here. That's an odd looking figure. There's one up here somewhere. Johnny Walker Red, look, it's got his hat on. Scary stuff. Here's another one. You can't see it so well on this one. You can see it, usually it's in the ice cubes. And Gentleman Jack. What's he got going on down here? And down here. Gentleman Jack. Drinking alcohol creates a neurotransmitter crisis in the brain. So what they do is, of course, if you're heavy drinkers, remember 20% of the people that drink 80% of the alcohol. These are really serious alcoholics. They don't want to go through delirium tremens. What they're doing is they're creating monsters in their advertisements, and it reminds them of the delirium tremens. I mean, this isn't going to affect you or me because we're not alcoholics. But if we had ever had the delirium tremens, looking at this would make us want to drink. You can see he's taking a step just like this. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, drinking alcohol creates a neurotransmitter crisis in the brain because alcohol increases the effectiveness of GABA, which blocks the chemicals that induce energy. The person becomes drowsy and the bodily functions become depressed. The brain, however, compensates by increasing the energy chemicals and creating a state of hyperarousal. When withdrawal takes place after heavy alcohol usage, the hyperproduction of the energy and feel-good chemicals reverses itself, and they are produced at lower levels than normal. And you've got a hangover. The decrease of the energy chemicals causes tachycardia, anxiety, increased muscular activity, hypertension, and maybe seizures. The activity of serotonin is a good example. Serotonin is reduced 30% when heavy drinkers stop drinking, causing anxiety and depression during withdrawal. Over the last century, many sociological experiments have been conducted to reduce the effects of alcohol abuse. Raising the drinking age, techniques to lower the child abuse in the home, limiting the sale of alcohol, working to lower the stress in everyday life. Most illicit drug users also drink. Most alcohol abusers use other drugs. A study in Europe in 2003 found that of 600 adolescent drug abuse users, 80% used both marijuana and alcohol. A similar study in the United States of adolescents in treatment found that 96% used alcohol with other drugs. A study in 2006 in the United States found that among heavy drinkers, 32.2% used illicit drugs at the same time. 80 to 95% of drinkers also smoke cigarettes, while 70% of alcoholics are heavy smokers as compared to 25% of the general population. Tobacco and alcohol are used to facilitate social situations. When alcohol and marijuana are used together, it accelerates relaxation. Drinking before using cocaine will prolong and intensify the effects of the cocaine, though it increases the predisposition for violence. Alcohol will facilitate an individual's ability to come down off of methamphetamine. Compulsive gamblers drink while gambling or gamble while drinking. It's kind of hard to tell which they're doing. Unfortunately, many times people with mental disorders will use alcohol to relieve their symptoms. Among men and women who are alcohol dependent, 4% suffer from bipolar disorder, 4 times the figure for the general population. 5.3% of the general public suffer from major depression, while 28% of people diagnosed with alcohol dependence suffer from major depression. 16.4% of the general public suffer from anxiety, while 37% of alcohol-dependent people suffer from the malady. However, it is difficult to draw direct parallels between alcohol and mental illness because the effects of alcohol mirror or can create mental problems. Heavy drinking disrupts the neurotransmitters in the reward pathway that lead to feelings of well-being. Opioid peptides, dopamine, serotonin, and GABA are those neurotransmitters. In one detox center, 70% of the alcoholics were originally diagnosed as suffering from depression. After abstinence of a month or more, the depression diagnosis had dropped to 30%. Any psychiatric diagnosis must always take into account the possibility of drug-induced symptoms. Individuals diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder show symptoms of impulsivity, lack of remorse for causing harm, inability to learn from mistakes. These same symptoms are found in drug abusers, including alcoholics. 80% of those diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder develop substance dependence. If a mother drinks during pregnancy, especially the first trimester of her pregnancy, there is a great possibility that the alcohol will do damage to the fetus, and she is more likely to miscarry or cause infant deaths. Alcohol intake during pregnancy is the leading cause of intellectual disability in the United States. Surveys of pregnant women in the United States shows that 12.4% drank some alcohol during several months of their pregnancy, 4% used in binge patterns, 0.7% were heavy drinkers, 18% smoked cigarettes, 4.3% used illicit drugs at least once. One of the things we're going to discover is that the binge pattern of drinking is the worst for the fetus. One study of 293 infants born with fetal alcohol syndrome, an alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder in Portland, Oregon, showed that 89% were using alcohol with at least 2 other drugs, 49% were using alcohol with cocaine, 100% were smokers, most were single mothers, most were high school dropouts, most had a history of sexual and or physical abuse, many had a history of drug or alcohol abuse in the family, many had learning disabilities that may have come from substance abuse effects when they were in the womb. In a study of FAS at the University of Washington, 2 groups of infants were followed into adolescence. By the age of 5, 38% of the children's biological mothers had died of alcohol-related causes. By the time the group reached adolescence, 69% of the biological mothers had died of alcohol-related causes. Alcohol consumption during pregnancy can cause 3 varying degrees of problems: fetal alcohol syndrome, alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, and alcohol-related birth defects. Fetal alcohol syndrome has retarded growth, facial deformities, problems with heart and limbs, central nervous system involvement, potentially lowered IQ with a range of 20 to 120 and a mean of 79. All 3 of these problems are referred to as fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And that's what it looks like if a baby is born. This is a normal baby's head. Look at that. And this is a baby born with fetal alcohol syndrome. You can see the brain isn't nearly as involved. It has almost no corpus callosum at all. There you go. That's a normal brain and a baby, an FAS baby. You can see that the brain is not fully developed. A child who suffers from the less severe forms of FASD, ARND, or ARBD may have an IQ ranging from 49 to 142, with a mean score of 90, though they will have other problems: difficulty with short-term memory, problems storing and retrieving information, difficulty forming links and making associations, problems making judgments and forming relationships, difficulty controlling temper and aggression, oversensitivity to bright light, loud noises, sharp smells, textures, and tastes of food. I have a great nephew who his mother was a heroin addict, and he has temper and aggression problems. Worldwide, FAS rates range from 0.33 to 2.9 cases per 1,000 births, though the figures vary by country and the use of alcohol. In the United States, the rates are 0.2 to 1.5 per 1,000 births. Asians and whites have 1 to 2 per 1,000. African Americans, 6 out of every 1,000 births. American Indians, depending on the tribe, 10 to 120 per 1,000, depending, of course, on the region and the tribe. The incidence of ARND and ARBD are about 3 times that of FAS in all groups in the United States. The most destructive time to consume alcohol for the fetus is the 3rd week through the 8th week of gestation, when the brain is forming. The corpus callosum is forming, the basal ganglia is forming, brain cell migration and organization are taking place. During the 2nd trimester, the facial features are forming and can be deformed by alcohol use. During the 3rd trimester, the hippocampus is forming, which might impair the encoding of visual and auditory information. The most destructive method of drinking for the fetus is to drink in a rapid manner. It is the concentration that is destructive, and drinking in that manner intensifies concentration. Studies have shown that 7 drinks per week is the minimum baseline for negative neurobehavioral effects, but if the mother is consuming all of their alcohol in a binge pattern, the pattern becomes more important than the volume. During the growth period, alcohol contact for 4 hours is enough to kill brain cells. The only logical drinking pattern for a pregnant woman is total abstinence. Strangely enough, when I was working at St. Joseph Hospital in Omaha, part of the hospital was Boys Town Institute, and they were doing studies with FAS. And they were some of the first people to discover any of this. This is back in the 80s. And I can remember the guy that was doing the research would come down and he'd borrow things from us from time to time. But he used to talk about the affinity alcohol has for fetal tissue, for fetal brain tissue. He was just amazed. Alcoholic fathers can also transmit mutated genes in their sperm due to the consumption of alcohol. While this can't lead to FAS, male children can suffer from other intellectual and functional deficits, impaired verbal skills, impaired thinking processes, impaired planning skills, problems with visual spatial skills, problems with motor skills, memory deficits, learning impairment. Alcohol interferes with the main inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain, the GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, which reduces inhibitions. People with pre-existing aggressive tendency will become more aggressive with the use of alcohol. 30% of the victims of violent crimes report that the perpetrator had been drinking alcohol before the offense. 15% of robberies, 26% of aggravated assaults, 50% of homicides. When arrested, alcohol levels of probationers was 0.18. Remember, 0.08 is drunk. When arrested alcohol levels of local jail inmates, it was 0.20. When arrested alcohol levels of state prisoners, it was 0.28. In a study from Memphis, Tennessee, of domestic violence calls, 92% of the perpetrators had consumed alcohol that day, the day of the disturbance. 67% of the perpetrators had used cocaine the day of the disturbance. Half had used alcohol and or cocaine often during the last 30 days. Alcohol encourages the release of pent-up anger, hatred, and desires that are normally controlled by society. The drunk's moral judgment and reasoning are impaired by the alcohol. 34 to 74% of perpetrators of sexual assault had been drinking before the assault. 30 to 79% of the victims of sexual assault had been drinking prior to the assault. In 2005, 40% of the motor vehicle fatalities involved alcohol, 16,885. 90% of these situations involved a blood alcohol test level of 0.08 or higher. 275,000 injuries occurred at the same time. However, an aggressive advertising campaign and more aggressive sentencing for DUI infractions has reduced traffic fatalities by 18%. How stupid can you be? 1 in 4 drunks drive within 2 hours of their last drink. Remember, it takes 60 to 90 minutes for your peak drunkenness. On any given weekday night between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m., 1 out of every 13 drivers is illegally drunk. On weekend mornings between 1 to 6 a.m., 1 in 7 drivers is drunk. If convicted, DUI perpetrators, 61% drank beer only, 2% drank wine only, 18% drank liquor only, 20% mixed their drinks, 61% only drank beer. That's a lot of beer. Alcohol-related crashes cost an estimated $148 billion in the United States every year. A blood alcohol test of 0.08 is the legal limit for drinking under the influence. The individual does not have to show impairment to be found guilty. It is estimated that only one driver is arrested for every 300 to 1,000 drunk driving trips. What has worked over the years to reduce traffic deaths due to alcohol, lowering legal inebriation levels from 0.10 to 0.08, imposing immediate license revocation for individuals whose ethyl alcohol levels exceed the legal limit, increasing legal drinking age from 18 to 21, maintaining zero tolerance for youth under 21 who are caught DUI. This has reduced crashes involving youth by 17 to 50%. Impounding or towing vehicles of DUIs, requiring mandatory treatment for DUI arrestees, dram laws, those who serve are liable for a customer who becomes intoxicated. 42 states have dram laws or limited dram laws. The ones that don't, Delaware, Kansas, Louisiana, Maryland, Nebraska, Nevada, South Dakota, and Virginia. Medical reports involving alcohol. 15 to 25% of emergency room patients reported the use of alcohol, especially those involved in fights, assaults, and falls. Alcoholics are 16 times more likely to die in falls, 10 times more likely to be burned or die in a fire. 31% of boating fatalities had a blood alcohol test of 0.10 or more. There was a pitcher, Hernandez, pitched for the Marlins, and he was driving a boat that crashed, and he killed himself. 40% of this was about 4 or 5 years ago. 40% of industrial fatalities and 47% of injuries involve alcohol. Alcoholics commit suicide at twice the rate of the general population. They tend to be white, male, middle-aged, unmarried, with a long history of drinking. Culture determines how an individual will consume alcohol. Wet cultures such as Austria, Belgium, France, Italy, and Switzerland sanction daily use of alcohol, integrate social drinking into everyday life. They serve watered-down wine to children with meals. They drink more beer and wine than dry cultures do. Austria, Belgium, France, Italy, and Switzerland are wet cultures. Dry cultures, such as they have in Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden, restrict alcohol use with heavy taxing. They consume more distilled spirits, about 50% more. They are characterized by binge drinking, particularly males on the weekend. Mixed cultures, such as that in Canada, England, Germany, Ireland, and the United States, demonstrate patterns of binge drinking, have a higher incidence of violence to women than either the wet or the dry cultures. Russia has had an alcohol-soaked culture for 500 years. Vodka is traditionally drunk between meals in large quantities. A form of prohibition that started in 1985 resulted in illegal manufacture and 11,000 alcohol poisoning deaths. The male life expectancy actually rose in Russia during the Prohibition period. As soon as Prohibition ended, alcohol poisonings increased to 40,000 per year. Male life expectancy dropped by 6 years in 1 year. In England, 70% of the population drinks regularly. 2/3 of the consumption of alcohol is in the form of beer, usually warmed with darts. Recent attempts to curb the destruction of alcohol on the British public has been in the form of prohibiting happy hours, allowing the pubs to stay open past 11 p.m. to reduce the need for binge drinking, encouraging the English to reduce average consumption to 3 drinks a day. On the average, men drink more per drinking episode than women. Men also tend to have more adverse social and legal effects from the alcohol. Women tend to increase their drinking after they pass 30 years old. Even when they are dependent on alcohol, women drink 1/3 less than men who are dependent. Hereditary factors seem to be stronger in women when it comes to alcohol. Female alcoholics have a 50 to 100% higher death rate than male alcoholics. Cirrhosis of the liver, circulatory disorders, suicide, and accidents are the cause of death. The younger an individual starts during using alcohol or tobacco, the more likely they will have a problem with the substances later in life. 6.2% of 8th graders have been drunk in the past month. 18.8% of 10th graders have been drunk in the past month. 30% of 12th graders have been drunk in the past month. The immaturity of the adolescent brain can lead to unwise decisions. When disinhibiting factors of alcohol is thrown into the mix, the individual is more likely to drive drunk, unplanned pregnancy, and sexual aggression. Drinking during adolescence leads to limited emotional growth. College students are adolescents into their junior year. 44% of our best and brightest admit to binge drinking. About half of the binge drinking college students admit that their grades fall into the C or F range. Many also admit to missing class on a regular basis. A national study showed a direct correlation between the number of drinks consumed per week and the individual's grade point average. Women are more sensitive to the deleterious effects of alcohol on grades. 86% will show the same pattern of drinking that they developed in high school. By graduation, the college-educated drink less than their non-college attending peers. Males binge more than females, 48.6% compared to 40.9%. 50.2% of white students binge as compared to 34.4% of Hispanic students, 26.2% of Asians, and 21.7% of blacks. Fraternity residents binge at 75.4%. Dormitory residents binge at 45.3%. Off-campus residents binge at 54.5%. Married residents binge at 26.5%. College drinking leads to 1,700 deaths per year, 690,000 physical assaults, 599,000 injuries, 97,000 sexual assaults. Intelligence about drinking doesn't increase with age. 2,500,000 Americans have alcohol-related problems, as patterns develop sometimes as a pre-adolescent can continue into old age. Alcohol can deplete bone density, especially in women who tend to be more susceptible to osteoporosis. Surprisingly, about 1/3 of all older people who drink didn't start until they were older. Asians and Pacific Islanders have the lowest alcohol consumption rate of any of the major racial or ethnic groups in the United States. 4% of the adult population are heavy consumers. Filipino and Japanese Americans are the most likely from this group to drink heavily. Koreans have the highest number of abstainers. African Americans have the second lowest percentage of heavy drinkers in their population at 4.2% compared to whites at 7.4%. Only 40.8% of blacks males drink monthly compared to 56.5% of white males. Peak drinking seems to occur after the age of 30. Explanations for high levels of abstention among blacks may be their long history of strong spirituality and matriarchal family structures. 8.1% of the Hispanic population consume alcohol at a heavy rate. Heavy alcohol use is highest among Mexican Americans. Past month use runs at 46.7%. Binge drinking runs at about 25.8%. 6.2% of Hispanics can be classified as alcohol dependent. American Indians, Alaskan Natives have drinking rates that greatly vary by region of the country and by tribal affiliations. The heaviest drinking appears to occur among the Northern Plains tribes. Of the 10 leading causes of death, 5 are directly connected to alcohol abuse. Number 3 is unintentional injuries. Number 4 is diabetes. Number 6 is liver disease and cirrhosis. Number 8 is suicide. Number 10, homicide. For American Indian, Alaska Natives, alcohol-related motor vehicle deaths are 5.5 times higher than the general population. Cirrhosis of the liver is 4.5 times higher. Alcoholism is 3.8 times higher. Homicide is 2.8 times higher, and suicide is 2.3 times higher. And that is the end of the lecture. So I'll talk to you guys next week. I think I will. I'm pretty sure I do. Anyway, that was alcohol.